Following the collapse of negotiations between Israel and Hamas over freeing the remaining hostages from Gaza and ending this war, Israel said it would consider other options, and now we know what one of these options is. Israel is considering to annex the Gaza Strip if Hamas does not accept a new agreement. In the meantime, there is a plan to tighten IDF control over Gaza to put more pressure on Hamas. And meanwhile, the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation pushes back against the narrative of a famine in the Gaza Strip, declaring that it is all a lie that Hamas is spreading. However, Israel believes that Qatar is also helping spread this narrative, as the IDF spokesperson's unit declared. Unfortunately, media outlets in Israel and around the world are echoing Hamas's false campaign. Even United States President Donald Trump hints about Hamas's fabrications and its lies in Gaza, saying, "Hungry children, that's how it looks on television." However, President Trump also said, "Some people say that killing the hostages is a price that has to be paid. I don't want to say that, and Israel will give Hamas a few days to agree to a ceasefire or will annex the Strip in stages until its surrender." End quote. This signals that the plan has been approved by Trump administration in the United States. And in a related story, President Trump has accused Iran of interfering in the negotiations with Hamas. And speaking of negotiations, Russian President Vladimir Putin also called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in recent days, and according to the Kremlin, Syria and Iran were both on the agenda of this phone call. And speaking of Netanyahu, there is new evidence emerging that Hezbollah attempted to assassinate the Prime Minister's attorney. Why would they want to do that? It's a complicated story, but the biggest story regarding Hezbollah this week is the question of whether or not they will agree to disarm peacefully or be disarmed by force. Iran is pushing them to refuse to disarm peacefully, and we'll have to see what they decide. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. In the Gaza Strip, Khan Yunis has been split in two. The 15-kilometer segment that cuts Khan Yunis from the east to the west was until recently only a faint line on the map. Now, it's been paved and the Hamas position in the city has been greatly weakened. Furthermore, Operation Gideon's Chariots, Merkavot Gidon, which ended this week, is a success, despite all the difficulties of fighting in a densely populated area while maintaining humanitarian aid and under heavy international pressure. Achievements have been recorded that had not been attained since the start of the war against Hamas. Yet, the plan to conquer Gaza City, the organization's last beating heart, remains no simple task. On the diplomatic front, Israel blames Qatar for refusing to put real pressure on Hamas, while media outlets identified with Doha, Qatar, blame Israel and promote an openly pro-Hamas line. And speaking of Doha, Qatar, Israel increasingly feels that Qatar is the one that started this campaign. Israel has increased food entry into the Gaza Strip under intense international pressure, and the IDF clarifies there is no starvation policy in Gaza. Meanwhile, Johnny Moore, recently appointed chair of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, claims that the United Nations is playing politics with Gazans' lives, defends the IDF's response to the allegations of mass killings near distribution centers, and he said that they attributed to us all the deaths in Gaza. We are operating in a combat zone. And elsewhere, in the cabinet meeting held on Monday evening, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented a new course of action in the Gaza Strip, emphasizing a change of diplomatic and strategic approach. And further afield, The Institute for Science and International Security think tank reported that activity has been detected in a tunnel area near the Iranian nuclear site in Isfahan, an area previously suspected of storing parts of Iran's enriched uranium stock. Also, after a meeting between Iranian and European representatives in Istanbul, the first since the end of this war between Israel and Iran, and amidst threats of renewed sanctions, the IRGC intelligence chief issued an explicit threat against Europe. In Israel's northern arena, less than a year after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah's elimination, the terror organization is in an unprecedented financial crisis. Financial advisors in the organization warned the leadership of disaster unless immediate funding is secured. To the south, Israel is preparing for a major strike on Houthi targets in Yemen, while the Houthis threaten to expand attacks on ships that work with Israeli ports. Security officials say that the Houthis have become Iran's new spearhead in this region. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 662 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region operating under the orders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to remind you that Israel is also fighting for the truth, and we need your help to win this war. Every day, thousands of lies are being published in an aggressive propaganda campaign against the Jewish state. We are here together to fight for the truth and to make sure that every day we bring you everything that's happening in Israel. We would appreciate it, guys, if you can invest in us. If you want to support and donate to TBN Israel and help us create more content from Israel, go to tbn.org/standwithisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/standwithisrael. And everything you give will help us create more video, more content from this land so that you will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is a spiritual war and we need your help. Let's begin with the fighting in the Gaza Strip against the Hamas terrorist organization. Over the past few months, the 36th Division has operated in one of Hamas's most significant strongholds in the Gaza Strip, the Khan Yunis area, alongside many operations aimed at destroying terror infrastructure and eliminating terrorists. At the end of June, the soldiers of the Combined Combat Team 188 Golani Brigade and Kfir Brigade set out on a unique mission to split the city in two. This engineering operation, which created the Magen Oz route, was designed to sever eastern Khan Yunis from its western side. The segment stretches roughly 15 kilometers and has now been paved, giving the IDF a decisive advantage as it seeks to deny Hamas the ability to use this city as a base of operations against Israel. Meanwhile, Operation Gideon's Chariots is supposed to end in these days unless it is extended for non-operational reasons to wait yet against Hamas' response in the negotiations. While the diplomats wait, the IDF will hold the lines that were set for it. In this operation, despite all the difficulties of fighting in densely urban terrain, while safeguarding humanitarian aid and under heavy international pressure, the achievements have been recorded that have not been seen since the start of this war. 3 Hamas brigades have been defeated in Rafah, Khan Yunis, and the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Yes, terrorists are still operating with guerrilla tactics, but the former military frameworks have been completely dismantled. 3 brigade-level commanders were eliminated, amongst them Yahya Sinwar's brother, Muhammad, who commanded the military wing. Also eliminated were Rafah Brigade Commander Muhammad Sabana and another member of Hamas's general staff, Hakem El-Issa. In addition, 8 battalion commanders, 39 company commanders, and 1,500 terrorists were eliminated. The Gaza Strip no longer looks the same as Rafah no longer exists, either above or below ground. The IDF destroyed all terror buildings and tunnel infrastructure in the city. The same is true for most of Khan Yunis, except for a sensitive zone and a humanitarian area. In the northern part of the Gaza Strip, almost nothing remains from Bet Hanun to Bet Lahia and El Atatara to the populated areas on the outskirts of Gaza City. These are not raids and withdrawals, but systematic, orderly action, even if relatively slow. Outgoing Golani Reconnaissance Unit Commander Lieutenant Colonel David Cohen, who has been in every arena over the past 21 months, explained that before we did it in a sprint, today we walk slowly, systematically, until the infrastructure is completely destroyed. Now, the IDF has received another mission: to disconnect Hamas from the humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip, a very complex task. Distribution centers were therefore established, which Hamas tried to hit, firing mortars and even shooting at the civilians who come to collect the food. At the same time, Hamas, with United Nations assistance, prevented trucks from entering the Gaza Strip. This was a key part of a media campaign that established a false narrative about starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, as it has sadly had great success all over the world and people believe the lies. In this way, Hamas has managed to claw out some successes and victories despite being utterly defeated on the battlefield and losing almost everything that they had of value when they started this war against Israel on October 7th. Now, pressure is growing on Israel to allow Hamas to keep these successes and victories, and the appetite of Hamas for more is also growing. It is even said that they are now hoping to achieve a ceasefire without releasing any more hostages. Now, what remains is the IDF's new plan to capture Gaza City, the organization's last beating heart. What does it include? That's a very good question, and currently around 1 million Gazan civilians are concentrated in Gaza City alone, within and under their cover. The Gaza Brigade, Hamas's last remaining intact brigade, has merged. The big question is how to fight in an area where hostages are suspected to be held. The same question applies to the central camps Nusirat, El Mariaj, and Dir el-Balach, where Hamas still has a presence, but there is also a heavy civilian population with nowhere to move. There are no magic solutions, guys, only the steadfast fighting of our amazing IDF soldiers. On that note, at Monday evening's small form cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented a new course of action in the Gaza Strip, emphasizing a change of approach, both politically and strategically. According to the plan that was presented to the forum, Israel will give mediators one more chance to persuade Hamas to soften its stance and agree to the deal that was put on the table about 2 weeks ago and has already been accepted by Israel. However, the Prime Minister clarified that Israel does not intend to wait indefinitely. On the contrary, a clear time frame and deadline will be set for receiving a positive answer from Hamas, one that will allow progress towards an agreement. In case of refusal or evasion, Israel will begin annexing areas inside Gaza. For this purpose, a dedicated administration was proposed to manage the civilian and the security control in these areas. If implemented, this step would mark a sharp turn in Israel policy towards Gaza, signaling a shift from pressure for an agreement to creating facts on the ground. And now, we keep our focus on the Gaza Strip, but shift slightly to look at Hamas's poisonous, false campaign, and I want to take this opportunity to invite you to give a click to the subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And speaking of Hamas enablers, this is amidst global criticism over the hunger crisis in the Gaza Strip and footage of Gaza residents struggling to receive humanitarian aid. Israel increasingly fears that Qatar is the main force driving this false narrative. The IDF clarified in a statement this week that there is no deliberate starvation policy. We are monitoring the situation. However, the army also admitted that food entering the Gaza Strip does not reach every spot and that there are instances of looting and corruption while the United Nations fails to cooperate in food distribution. Simultaneously, Israel has increased food entry into the Gaza Strip due to the pressure from this false narrative about starvation that is promoted by Hamas and its enablers. Yet, it is clear that even until now, Israel's food entry has been massive. After numerous media outlets recently fell into the trap of Hamas and faced backlash online when speaking of Gaza's starvation campaign, IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Efi Defrin joined the criticism in an unusual statement. In a briefing to the press, he addressed the false narrative about starvation in the Gaza Strip that includes harsh images of hungry children that is circulated worldwide, fueling rising anti-Semitism against Jews in the world. He directly attacked major media outlets that are echoing Hamas's messages saying there is no starvation in Gaza. It is a false campaign run by Hamas. Unfortunately, media outlets in Israel and around the world are running this false campaign. It is not true. It is used against us to harm us. On Monday, United States President Donald Trump weighed in on the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, telling British Prime Minister Keir Starmer Hamas is using the hostages as human shields. It's an ongoing process. Hamas has hardened its positions in recent days. So I'm talking with Prime Minister Netanyahu about different plans. He added, "We know where the hostages are in some cases. Israel does not want to go in there because it means the hostages would be murdered. Some people say that's the price that must be paid, but we don't like to say that, and I don't think that the Israelis do either." Asked by reporters about Gaza's humanitarian situation, he said, "We also don't forget the damage of October 7. Israelis have strong feelings about the hostages, and as long as Hamas holds 20 hostages, it has a shield. It's a complex situation. If they didn't have hostages, everything would be faster, but they do." He also revealed Iran gave Hamas instructions and signals in the last negotiations, causing it to harden its positions. There are other ways to free the hostages. Negotiations is the most logical way. I hope the food that now is entering reaches the people in need, but it is taken by Hamas. It's a terrible situation. It is hard to deal with Hamas, but we must care for the humanitarian needs of the Gazan people. Israel will have to ensure the food reaches the people. It has responsibility. Trump added that food centers would be established in Gaza, saying, "We'll do it in cooperation with some very good people. We just raised trillions of dollars, a lot of money, and we're going to spend some on food. Other countries are joining us. They want to help. The centers will have no borders, no fences. There are hungry children. It's real hunger that cannot be faked." This is Donald Trump. And nevertheless, the IDF Arabic language spokesperson, Colonel Avichai Aderi, published photos of Hamas terrorists in tunnels storing food aid packages and enjoying fresh food without shortage, accompanied by commentary saying, "Pictures don't lie. Hunger exists only on screens and only for propaganda purposes. On the ground, the tunnels are full of food." The terror organization steals aid, fills its belly, and then sheds crocodile tears in front of the cameras. This is according to the IDF spokesperson. While all of this is going on, efforts at finding a diplomatic end to this war also continue. Amid the deadlock in hostage deal talks, and despite reports that mediators continue to press Hamas to back down from its demands, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers and MKs, and even President Donald Trump and his envoy Steve Witkoff have in recent days dropped various hints that Israel is on its way to conquering the Gaza Strip and assuming military control there. Likud MK Moshe Saad said this morning that there is no choice right now but to conquer the Strip from end to end. According to him, Israel even received an okay from President Donald Trump. He added, "I think we're finally getting to conquering the Gaza Strip." Partial deal? He did everything to reach it, even at a heavy price. Now he realizes that this partial deal does not exist. Defense Minister Israel Katz also sent a threatening message this week similar to previous times and said, if Hamas does not release the hostages, the gates of hell will open in Gaza. Meanwhile, the chairman of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Reverend Dr. Johnny Moore, issued a statement on Monday regarding the false narrative of starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip, declaring that everything is a Hamas lie, and adding that the United Nations is playing politics with Gazan lives. He also said, "We have seen no indication that the IDF is not complying with international law and its obligations." And speaking against the backdrop of the fund's expanding activity in the Gaza Strip, Moore stated, "The IDF has a very difficult challenge, and I don't want to judge it, especially when Hamas is a terrorist organization that violates every international law and hides behind civilians." Moore's statement was an attempt to respond to reports about what is happening at the fund's 4 aid centers, including the hundreds of fatalities that have occurred in the vicinity of these centers. Some of these fatalities have been the results of gunfire, and there is a dispute about whether this fire came from the IDF, from Hamas, or from other armed factions. Some were also trampled in the rush. Although the fund has been accused that the distribution of aid in its compounds is disorganized and even leads to chaos in which whoever is strongest prevails, allowing the strong to seize the aid and then sell it at high prices, Moore claims this is a propaganda and warns against spreading the lies of the Hamas terrorist organization. He said that the residents are receiving the aid, and this propaganda is harming them. According to Moore, the United Nations and international organizations in Gaza are sabotaging the fund's work and playing with the lives of Gaza's residents for political considerations. Regarding the accusations that the GHF distribution centers have become death traps, Moore said it's Hamas disinformation that has been laundered by friendly people in the press and international organizations. The fact is that the fund has been the only consistent source of food distribution in Gaza over the past 2 months. 100 million meals have been distributed to 800,000 Gazans. The whole story was fabricated by Hamas and shared by sympathetic people in the mainstream media and in international organizations who, instead of working with us to reach more Gazans, decided not only to boycott us, but to sabotage our work. However, he added, "We are surviving and growing stronger. Today, we distributed more food despite all the challenges. This is a historic success, and you cannot imagine what Gaza would look like without the GHF." And asked if there is any substance to the United Nations and Hamas claims that 1,000 people have already lost their lives near these distribution centers, Moore replied that number is fake. Hamas has adopted a technique in which it makes no distinction between civilians and gunmen who are killed. They just release a number and attribute it to all of us. We operate in the middle of an active war zone. They attributed every death in Gaza to us. Not one person was shot in a distribution center, and if people were hurt nearby, usually a kilometer or 2 away, this information was officially reported by us. What was not officially reported are the hundreds of fatalities near United Nations centers or murdered by Hamas, which attributes to the GHF or to the IDF. This is not true. This is according to Johnny Moore. And meanwhile, in recent days, Israel has in fact begun to flood the Gaza Strip with humanitarian aid using the old method through the United Nations and by airdrops, despite claims that the supplies reach Hamas. Now, Moore claims that in the last 24 hours, since the United Nations aid mechanism resumed large-scale operations, more Gazans were hurt there than in all our work over the past 2 months. He added, "I don't say this as criticism of the United Nations, but as an indication of the severity of the situation. We do not want to criticize the United Nations. We want to work together with it. We did not intend to replace any international organization." Israel, it should be noted, had barred the United Nations aid distribution for many months until the fund was activated. According to the government and the IDF, the goal was to prevent the aid from reaching Hamas. In this context, Moore added, Hamas regularly stole entire truckloads of food from the international community and reproved that it is possible to distribute food directly to the people without the terrorist organizations stealing it. And guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you the whole truth, so help us spread these videos on social media with your friends, and remember that Israel is fighting a spiritual battle against forces of evil, and we need to tell the people what's happening so that everybody will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So guys, if you want to support our initiative, we just started a campaign called Stand with Israel. If you want to donate to this campaign and help us create more content from Israel, go to tbn.org/standwithisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/standwithisrael, and help us share the truth of what's happening in this land. Now, we are switching our focus to the ongoing battle against Iran's renegade nuclear program. The Institute for Science and International Security, ISIS, a think tank that monitors nuclear activities around the world, reported on Monday that it detected activity in the tunnel complex near Iran's Isfahan nuclear site, an area previously suspected of storing part of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. So far, the Institute has not published satellite images of its operation in that location. However, Israeli and Western intelligence figures have determined that most of Iran's uranium stockpile was buried in Isfahan tunnel networks. A senior Israeli intelligence official estimates that additional stockpiles might be found at the Natanz and Fordo, but these are not accessible to Iran because of the strike's results. The Israeli official also claimed that he expressed no concern about the fate of the enriched uranium stockpile that is sufficient for about 10 nuclear bombs, because Israel would almost certainly detect any attempt to extract the radioactive material, giving it enough time to strike that area. It is important to remember that President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had previously vowed to strike Iran again if it attempts to restore its capabilities. And with that in mind, according to the think tank report, at the main site in Isfahan, where uranium was converted into nuclear fuel, rods and uranium metal, a critical technology in bomb production, minimal activity was observed around the destroyed buildings. Some roads were cleared of debris, but vehicle presence is sparse and many roads are still blocked by the rubble and the barriers. But lately, vehicles were observed at the northern tunnel and its entrance, and access to the tunnel opening, which had been blocked with earth, was opened during the past week. Additionally, the middle entrance saw activity in mid-July, including heavy equipment on site, but no significant progress in reopening access to the tunnel. The southern entrance remained blocked by barriers with no visible activities. This is a fortified tunnel complex dug near the main conversion and nuclear facility at Isfahan, one of the central sites in Iran's nuclear program. The area is suspected of possibly containing part of the uranium stock enriched to a near military level of 60%, and its depth is assessed at greater than that number that is attributed to Fordow. On the first day of the war, Tehran claimed it had moved its enriched uranium stockpiles to a safe place, so to speak, and this tunnel is one of the possible sites that they referred to in this statement. In a related story, President Trump continues to reveal new details from the negotiations with Hamas on a hostage deal, and in remarks this week, he revealed that Iran intervened and sabotaged the last negotiations with the terrorist organization that controls the Gaza Strip. The president did not detail exactly how Iran acted, but emphasized that it was direct interference that apparently prevented possible progress in these deals. According to him, Hamas figures responded to Iranian pressure or instructions preventing the formulation of the understandings that had been forged behind the scenes. In earlier comments, Trump laid the responsibility for the situation at Hamas's feet, explaining that it was very hard with them in these negotiations. So if I can make a brief comment of my own on this situation, it appears that Iran has not yet internalized what took place in the country during the 12-day war against Israel. Despite the air superiority that Israel achieved over Iran within the only few hours of this war, the elimination of dozens of senior IRGC and military officers, nuclear scientists, and other important figures, and the loss of much of their industrial capabilities, the air defensives, and the ballistic missile infrastructure, the regime continues to talk as if they have won this war. They also talk if they don't see why there should be any consequences for the losses that they sustained or any change in their behavior or rhetoric in response to what they've just experienced. For instance, the Revolutionary Guards continue to make threats, and this week, the head of intelligence for Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Majid Khadamni, issued an explicit threat against the European countries that met over the weekend in Istanbul to discuss Iran's nuclear program under the looming threat of renewed sanctions. According to a report in the El Arabiya media portal, Khadamni told reporters on Sunday that if the Europeans want to take any steps, we have options we can use effectively. He also stressed that the Europeans themselves will be the biggest losers in this case. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report the whole truth about everything that's happening in Iran. So guys, if you want to stand with us, hit that subscribe button and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, we're switching our focus to Israel's northern arena, where Hezbollah, like their Iranian masters, don't seem to have internalized the terrible defeat that they have suffered in this war. A report this week indicates that Hezbollah figures tried to assassinate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attorney, who represents him at The Hague. I'm not sure why they tried to do this particular individual. Let me know what you think in the comments. But meanwhile, Dr. Jackie Neria, a researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs think tank, said this week that Hezbollah continues to arm itself, defying the Lebanese government and making clear it has no intention of disarming, while the United States appears unsure of how to proceed. According to him, the situation in Lebanon crosses the danger line. Hezbollah not only refuses to respond to the disarmament demands, but also tightens its grip on the state institutions, while Washington engages in toothless diplomatic tactics. However, despite this, Hezbollah has plenty of problems and even appears to be on the verge of financial collapse. For example, a foundation affiliated with Hezbollah recently informed the families of the terrorists who have lost their lives in the battle with the IDF that it would stop subsidizing their children's tuition, which adds up to tens of millions of dollars every year. The Lebanese national government financial and public relations campaign on Hezbollah's financial branch, El-Qard El-Hassan, combined with a long series of United States sanctions, has also dealt a serious blow to its economic activity. Even in Beirut's Dahya neighborhood, the organization's undisputed stronghold, the terror movement struggles to pay contractors to complete renovation work on damaged buildings. The Lebanese newspaper Sawat Beirut described the desperate situation this week, saying that Hezbollah is facing a severe and unprecedented economic crisis that could change its trajectory and affect Lebanon. In a desperate attempt to reduce spending, Hezbollah is now adopting a comprehensive austerity policy that hurts every sector. According to reports, financial advisors in the organization have warned its leadership of a catastrophic situation if immediate funding is not secured. According to those advisors, it is already particularly difficult to receive funds from Iran, which has significantly reduced Hezbollah's budget. This situation is exacerbated by logistical and security complications that delay the flow of funds and worsen the financial crisis. The result stems from two dramatic changes in the past year, both consequences of Hezbollah's military defeat. First, the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria and the rise of an Islamist government hostile to Hezbollah, which has fought weapons and drug smuggling, two of the most important sources of funding for the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Second, the straightening of Lebanese leaders in Beirut who, under American pressure, ordered tighter supervision of attempts to smuggle Iranian funds to Hezbollah through Rafik Hariri International Airport. True, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem has vehemently refused to surrender the weapons, and Beirut still hesitates regarding a direct confrontation with him. On the other hand, the Americans and the Gulf states are presenting the Lebanese leadership with a firm equation: concentrate the weapons in the state's hand in exchange for aid or face an intensified economic crisis. However, these days, Qassem has set himself one goal: to survive at any cost. Still, many of his internal rivals sense the weakness. Israel is already exploiting it, eliminating Hezbollah terror operatives almost every day despite the ceasefire. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report about all the truth of what's happening in Israel. And guys, hit that subscribe button if you want to help us. Now, let's move on to some of the developments in the great power competition in this region and the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, and according to the Russian news agency TASS, Putin emphasized to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu the importance of Damascus sovereignty and also discussed Iran's nuclear program with him. The last conversation between the two was last May. Before that, they spoke only in December of 2023. And according to the Kremlin announcement, various aspects of the tense situation in the Middle East were discussed. The Russian side reaffirmed its unchanged position in favor of a solely political solution to the existing problems and conflicts in this region. In addition, Putin especially emphasized the importance of supporting the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, strengthening its internal political stability by preserving the legitimate rights and interests of all ethnic and religious groups of this population. So before the call, Netanyahu visited an intelligence directorate base together with the IDF intelligence chief, Major General Shlomi Binder, telling the assembled troops at the media that the plan to destroy Israel is currently off the table. That's good. And guys, here at TBN Israel, we'll continue to report on every development in Syria. And guys, help us share the truth of what's happening by subscribing to this channel. Now, we are switching our focus once again to the Houthis in Yemen and their threats to the maritime passage through the Bab el-Mandab Strait between the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, one of the world's most important sea lanes. Security sources say that the Houthis in Yemen continue to launch missiles and UAVs towards Israel and to attack commercial vessels in the Red Sea. In doing so, they strengthen the status as Iran's most active and significant military arm in the regional arena, providing it an efficient tool for proxy warfare without fear of direct involvement or heavy diplomatic cost. The Houthis control extensive fortified areas in northern Yemen, including hard-to-access mountainous terrains and parts of the coast along the Red Sea near the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Their ability to conduct maritime terror against trade routes constitutes a direct threat to the West and to Israel. The Yemeni campaign allows Iran to create a new focal front in the southern Arabian Peninsula under ideal conditions, low cost, low risk, and high geopolitical return. While Iran's power is reduced in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, Yemen has become the new center that concentrates the military and the diplomatic weight of Iran's foreign policy. The Houthis are not merely a defensive outpost of Tehran, but an offensive arm ready to risk itself for Iran's regional project. Their capacity to disrupt trade routes and ignite multiple arenas simultaneously makes them a perpetual strategic threat, and for Iran, they are a weapon that can also serve as a bargaining chip in future nuclear negotiations. But all of that is just what's happening right now in the present. Western intelligence analysis point to far more concerning aspects of this conflict, which could mean big problems in the future. That's because Yemen has become a military laboratory for Iran, and even more so for China. Missiles, air defense systems, and radars are transferred to the Houthis in violation of sanctions and tested there in the field. Iranian advisors and sometimes Hezbollah personnel assist in assembling, operating, and launching missiles and UAVs. It assumes that the Chinese military is receiving regular reports about all of this and incorporating the data that they receive into their own plans for future operations against Taiwan and other neighbors in the Western Pacific. Now, getting back to the present, airstrikes have failed to halt the Houthi campaign of maritime terror, and diplomatic pressure is limited in its influence. In the current reality, it seems that Iran is in no hurry to abandon its long-term investment in the Houthis. On the contrary, it now sees them as its main tool for exerting regional and international pressure and for conducting conflicts against Israel and the West without placing Iranian soldiers on the ground. In other words, the Houthis have become not only a component of the axis of resistance, but the forefront of Iran's new strategy. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development regarding the Houthis in Yemen and other regional issues. As always, we invite you to be part in helping us share the truth. But the most important thing that you can do, guys, is to unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. This is a spiritual war. We need your prayers for the IDF soldiers. We need your prayers for the hostages. We need your prayers for wisdom to our leaders. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.